When we talk about the God of Christian theology, we run into a bit of a puzzle. The descriptions are filled with dozens of attributes, and a lot of them seem to clash. How can one single being be described as both infinitely loving and at the same time full of wrath? Well, this explainer is going to dive right into that very problem.
And yeah, that's really the central question, isn't it? But it's not just about love and wrath. How can a being be right here with us, super present in the world, but also completely beyond it? How do you get absolute justice and, at the same time, unconditional grace? These aren't just minor details, They're these core tensions that theologians have been wrestling with for centuries.
And this is just scratching the surface. When you start listing them all out, omniscience, omnipotence, immutability, it just feels overwhelming. It's like a collection of contradictions. So how have thinkers even tried to build a coherent picture out of all this?
Well, this brings us to what we could call the impossible description. And this isn't a new problem. For a very long time, it's pushed theologians to come up with frameworks, systems, to try and organize all these different traits so they actually make sense together.
It's the first step in solving any really complex problem, right? You try to categorize the pieces, and that's exactly what's been done here, creating different frameworks to sort through all these various and sometimes conflicting attributes.
So, one really popular method, especially in Reformed theology, is to split everything into two big buckets. You have the communicable attributes. These are the ones we humans can kind of reflect, even in a small way, like love or justice. And then you have the incommunicable ones, the things that belong to God alone, like being all-powerful. It's a pretty neat and tidy system on the surface.
Okay, so here's another approach. Theologian Millard Erickson suggested dividing them a bit differently, into God's greatness and God's goodness. So greatness covers all those infinite power-type attributes, like being all-knowing. And goodness covers the personality traits, like being loving or merciful. Again, it's a totally logical attempt to bring some order to the chaos. But here's where things take a turn. Theologian Donald MacLeod basically says, hold on. He argues that these boxes, as helpful as they might seem, are ultimately artificial. He even says they can be misleading, and he suggests that maybe we shouldn't be sorting these attributes into piles at all. What if one of them isn't just another item on the list? What if one of them is the key that unlocks all the others?
And this is what brings us to a fascinating candidate for that key: holiness. What if holiness isn't just one characteristic among many, but is actually the fundamental, foundational attribute that explains everything else? The emphasis on this is absolutely critical. As the theologian R.C. Sproul points out, Scripture never says God is love, 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 or justice, 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 but it does repeat holy, holy, holy. Now, in ancient Hebrew, repeating something 3 times like that was their way of hitting the caps lock button. It was the absolute superlative. It signaled the most important, the most foundational quality of all.
Okay, so if holiness is that important, what does it actually mean? Well, it's often defined as, moral perfection or being set apart. But a deeper dive suggests it's not just some concept to be defined. It's an experience that you have to feel to truly get it.
So, to really wrap our heads around this idea of holiness, we have to move past simple definitions and into the world of human experience. What does it actually feel like to encounter something truly holy?
The philosopher Rudolf Otto came up with this incredible phrase to describe it: mysterium tremendum et fascinans. It basically means a mystery that makes you feel two things at the exact same time, things that totally contradict each other. It's something that terrifies you and pushes you away, and something that fascinates you and draws you in.
Let's break that down. The fascinance part, that's the attraction. It's this powerful, captivating charm. It's when you encounter something so good, so desirable, that you feel this overwhelming pull toward it, this deep longing to be near it. But then, at the very same moment, you feel the tremendum. This is an awful kind of dread. It's a powerful sense of your own smallness, your own unfitness in its presence. It's that feeling that you absolutely do not belong there, that you are unworthy to be near it. It actually repels you.
The writer David Foster Wallace captured just a tiny sliver of this feeling. He was a really good amateur tennis player, but then he watched a touring pro, a guy named Michael Joyce, and he realized the gap in skill between them was so huge, so vast, that the very idea of them sharing a court felt, in his words, absurd and in a certain way obscene. That feeling of an unbridgeable gap, that sense of I don't belong here, that's a shadow of the tremendum.
Okay,
So, if holiness is defined by this weird dual response of attraction and repulsion, what does that logically imply? What does that tell us about the nature of a holy being? Well, the philosophical conclusion is surprisingly clear and powerful.
The philosopher Mark C. Murphy lays the argument out step by step. 1. The holy causes this dual response. 2. For that to even be possible, there has to be a massive, almost infinite value gap between you and the holy being. 3. The only way to guarantee that gap exists between this being and literally any other possible being is if the holy being is absolutely perfect in every way, which leads to the conclusion, 4. A truly holy being must be an absolutely perfect being.
And this is the solution. It's brilliant. Holiness isn't just another item on that long list. It's the source of the list. If a being is truly holy, it must be absolutely perfect. And if it's absolutely perfect, then it must possess all those other perfections we were talking about. Omnipotence, omniscience, goodness, justice. They all just naturally flow from this one foundational attribute.
Now, looking at things through this holiness-centered framework, it radically changes your perspective. And to see just how much, let's compare it to the more common view that love is God's primary attribute.
So, a lot of people just assume love is God's #1 attribute. And in that framework, God's main motivation is benevolence, basically acting for the good of others. But in the holiness framework, the primary motivation is responding to status, specifically that infinite gap between perfection and imperfection. This doesn't get rid of love, not at all, but it definitely places it in a whole new context.
And this brings us right back to our original puzzle. A being of absolute perfection is infinitely attractive. That's the fascinant. But the infinite gap between that perfection and our imperfection is terrifying, and that's the tremendum. Suddenly, things like grace and mercy are expressions of that attractive goodness, while wrath and justice are expressions of the absolute incompatibility between perfection and imperfection. The contradiction, it just disappears.
And so this leaves us with a final, pretty profound thought. If holiness is the foundation, it doesn't diminish divine love. It actually reframes it in a radical way. A love that bridges an infinite gap is arguably way more profound than one that just flows from simple benevolence. So the real question becomes, what does it truly mean for a being of absolute perfection to choose to enter into a relationship with the imperfect?